Something that I had learned about you in preparing for this interview is that when you were younger, one of seven children,
Right.
you only got to watch 1/2 hour of television a week, and it had to be voted amongst all seven of you. Is that right?
Yes, that's true. That's how I tell the story. In truth, because my older brother was old enough, actually, not to be living at home. The story is fudged a little bit and made more compact. But the general gist of it was, yes, my parents were um, very strict about TV, especially when we were in grade school up until about middle school. They didn't admire it very much. Um, we had a TV. They watched it, but they thought it was basically potentially brain rot, and so we had our diet of TV really limited. Uh, we had homework, and we had the library, and the library was our liberation and was our, if you will, our salvation from tedium, from boredom. If you could go to the library, you could go anywhere. And it was a replacement for TV in a way. And in my mind, it was not such a bad idea, although I did feel impoverished as a kid, and I felt, I didn't have the same goods that everybody else in the neighborhood had.
Yes, you missed F Troop. It's tragic, but I'm assuming that that's part of the ways you maybe go about building a writer just a little bit. If you're encouraged to go and seek out, because they didn't censor your books, right? You could read anything you wanted to read.
Absolutely. They did not censor the books, and nor did librarians, although I wasn't interested in reading adult books until I got to be, late middle school. Uh, but you're right. The full range of the library. Uh, and furthermore, I had an ample supply of pencils, pens, crayons, and paper. So I always consider that the very act of being bored is a stimulus to the imagination. Because when you're bored, you can either go to sleep and be depressed, or you can do something about it. And if all you have is paper and pencils, then you make up a story, or I did, make up a story, make up a play, make up a sonnet, make up something just to keep yourself awake and alive and attached to the world. And that's what I did. Do you know, Rob, there's a book called, I think it's called Outliers by the author Malcolm Gladwell. And he's a New Yorker writer, and he writes books on concepts. In this particular book, he takes to task the notion that some people succeed more than their peers. And he asks himself the question, why? He comes up with a number of different theories, but one of the ones that he comes up with at the very beginning is to ask the question, why, say, did the Beatles, who were one of more than a handful of groups trying to make it in pop music in the early 60s, why did they rise to the top so fast and so hard when other groups that starting out were just as good didn't? And his thesis, why it happened, he says, could be that when they went to Germany, when they were just starting out, to live there for a few months and play some gigs, they were supposed to play like 2.5 hours a night, maybe. And so they were going to rehearse during the day and play at night in this bar. Turns out that they were supposed to split the bill with another group, and the other group had a change of plans and never showed up. So the Beatles ended up, either they played 2 sets a night, or they played every night for, I don't know how many months, or maybe a year or something. What Gladwell is saying is that they had twice the amount of airtime that any other group of just starting out could possibly hope to have, and they improved at a faster rate because they did nothing else. They just threw themselves into it. By the time they got back to London and started recording albums, he said they had put in 10,000 hours of work perfecting their skills as a group. Similarly, he says, somebody like Bill Gates. Bill Gates went to Harvard, I think, and dropped out, came home. His parents, instead of throwing him out on the street, let him take over the garage. His father worked at a Southern California computer department or some business that had access to monitors and wires and such. And Bill Gates worked in that garage night and day for years, teaching himself the basics of what would become a certain kind of computer program that would give us the personal computer and Microsoft. Gladwell says this was 10,000 hours of self-instruction. And by the time he was 22, he was one of the most knowledgeable people in the world about this kind of thing. Now, I'm not comparing myself to the Beatles, and I'm not comparing myself to Bill Gates or to Jascha Heifetz or to Mozart or to any genius, any breakout outlier person who did enormous things at early ages. But there is one similarity, and that's what the long arc of my disquisition is about. By the time I got out of high school, I am quite sure that I had put in 10,000 hours of story writing on my own steam, without supervision, without anybody prompting, without anybody even looking over my shoulder and saying, well done, Gregory. I just love to do it so much that I wrote stories nonstop from the 4th grade to 12th grade. And by the time I was done, I had, and I still have, stacks and stacks of manuscript, handwritten manuscript with drawings in them, thousands of pages of them. And I'm sure I touted it up. I'm sure it's about 10,000 hours worth of work that I did as a hobby as a kid through grade school, middle school, and high school. So by the time I got into college and I had my first idea for a novel, I was ready to write it because I had been an apprentice to myself and to all the great writers that I read and loved and whose books inspired me. And so I was ready to go at the age of 22.
You won't say it, so I will. Gregory Maguire is the John Lennon of fiction. So that's out there now. I